whatever.
Okay.
So we started this class we figured it out in 2021. And we met a couple in 2020 when everything was locked down and we were doing the little home group things in our homes, you know, and watch parties. We were watching church together in our home, and we met this couple that just blew us away and just came to be a part of our heart and family for us. And so they've been here they taught the first 2 classes with us, but they've come back every class since then.
To teach this lesson. So they're you're gonna hear a conversation today about finances, but you're gonna feel love from these 2. I can't explain it any better way than that. They carry the kingdom, they carry God's presence, and they just carry love on however they talk about this. And because everybody knows that finances carries a lot of emotional baggage along with it. But I can't say enough about these 2 people. They're just amazing. And
yeah. And the scripture that comes to mind when I think about them, that we prosper as our soul prospers. And they walk in soul prosperity.
Yeah.
And it manifests in every area of their life. So really, I feel like they're gonna release a blessing into your lives, into your marriages, and into your families tonight. So I just want you know that when you honor a prophet, then you receive a prophet's reward. They walk in kingdom prosperity, so let's honor them in what they walk in. So we all stand and welcome Wes and Christi Lyons.
Alright, Tim and John, awesome.
They're amazing.
Yes.
And this class is amazing, and we're really excited to be here because it's something really special to watch the beginning of family, and to watch the healing that the Holy Spirit wants to bring through all the different classes and work that you guys have done. So I'm Christy.
I'm Wes.
This is Wes. And we have been at the Upper Room since 2019. The Lord has moved to Dallas then from Maryland. And we have 4 boys, 10, 8, 6, and 4. I was in the Navy for 8 years, and then we had 2 kids while I was still in the Navy, and then I decided to stay home with them, and so that was a big change. And I love it, and now I homeschool them, which is a profession. I had to convince myself of that, so I'm going to say it with emphasis because it was hard for me to get there.
And I'm Wes. We're both naval officers together for 8 years, and I've been in finance since 2015. I've gotten to walk with over 100 families, kind of walking through how you set goals, how you integrate your faith into expressing that. And so I've had a lot of chance to read a ton of books and walk with a ton of families, asking questions about how do we set goals together, how do we integrate this into our marriage. I don't work actively in financial planning anymore, but still just carry, you'll get to hear a bit of our journey this evening of trying to figure out how to walk in unity together, essentially. Yeah. The Road to One is such a beautiful name for what we're trying to do, both getting ready for a marriage and in marriage.
Yeah. So we tried to get out of telling this story last time we taught this, and somebody called us on it because they were like, no, you guys have to tell the story. So I'm not gonna, because it's embarrassing. So I'm not gonna try to get out of it this time, but this is why this is important to us. We were just married. We'd been married about
2 months.
3 months, 2 or 3 months. Yeah. And we got sent by the Navy to do training up in Newport, Rhode Island. So we don't have, we're college graduates. We have good jobs. So we had money, guys. Let's remember, we had money. But we didn't get to live together. We lived adjacent to each other while I trained a company and he trained a company like dorm style. And so we would see each other on the weekends when we had some breaks. So there was one Saturday night where we got caught by the base police having sex in our car. Because
I was too cheap that we should be out out on the
we
town.
couldn't
doing
get a
hotel.
hotel.
That's when.
And I was horrified and really embarrassed and really angry because you'll notice, like in each relationship, one person tends to spend a little bit more freely and the other person tends to spend less freely. And that would be me. I was like, I didn't want just any hotel, because we also had gone to crappy hotels, and I was like, listen, don't take me to that crappy hotel anymore. So he was like, well, let's do no hotel. And so then we were like, this is not working for us. We need to figure out how to get on the same page with this.
Yeah, and that really kicked off the first big fight in our marriage around money, because we realized we had no budget and we weren't really talking about, we had no grid. We were just, things were coming up, and when they became a conflict, we would talk about it. We didn't have a framework that we were talking in, and so I solved that, I thought, by writing a budget. And I said, hey, we've got a budget here, but that set up the real fight 3 months later. The real fight that came 3 months later when, because I had written the budget, we had not written the budget. And it wasn't until we...
Which actually, I actively wanted to avoid talking about money, so I was like, great, if that makes you feel better, then I'm okay with it. So this wasn't he's trying to trample me. I kind of had abdicated responsibility in that because I didn't want to deal with it. Because I was like, this is annoying, so if it makes you feel better, go for it,
And so it took, it was probably a 3-day fight that fall. We got married in June. It's sometime in the fall when the real fight happened. And it was several days of incredibly intense tension. And what it came down to was realizing that we had not co-created a budget together, and we hadn't really gotten into talking about finances in a way that would start walking us into unity. So we're gonna share quite a few principles, and a lot of what we're gonna talk about is creating ways. We'll harp on budgeting. We'll harp on a couple of things, but that was the beginning of a journey of walking into unity together, basically.
And we'll talk about why we think budgeting matters, because it is important to us. But it's not important, it's not a check in the box that you do, it's important because it really is gonna bring up a lot of things like, what are your goals? How are we gonna walk forward in unity in all of these different life changes and situations that happen? So if you remember just 3 things from this evening, you can remember how embarrassed I was. No, don't remember that, but that good marriages actually talk about money a lot. And I know that, as we've experienced just different marriages that we kind of, interface with, as you get to know people, you see there's some people that don't feel a lot of freedom to talk about money. They either actively avoid the conversation, or one partner hides it from the other partner, how much they're spending. They're like, oh, hide that box, right? I don't want them to know about someone on Amazon again, right? But good marriages, where both people are really happy and thriving, they talk about money a lot, just every day, because it kind of comes up in all of the different things that we're doing, and there's not fear or control that happens in those conversations. And we're going to talk about keeping a budget, and we think everybody should do it because nobody's a mind reader. We've been married, we've been married for 16 years, 17 or 16 this year?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. We've been married for a while. And, we have been actively budgeting since I left the house, for that whole time. So we've gotten pretty good where we can we bring something up and we're both generally around the same page, but that, you gotta work on that. And even then, we still have to check in with each other and talk about where we're gonna be so that we're both happy with that. So keep a budget because nobody reads minds. And in the last thing, and really the most important thing, is that in this, like in other things, unity is your number 1 priority. It doesn't unity doesn't fall second to being wise with money. And it doesn't fall second to saving. Like unity in how you talk about your finances, unity in how you execute your finances, it's your number one priority. Because they, from some of the financial planning courses and things that he's taken publication, they talk about it a lot, because as financial planners, you're really with families kind of executing the how-tos of how do we manage money. And it's money is the number one cause of stress and conflict for most people. So stress is going to come from their money. Conflict is going to come with how we interface with money. And it's the number two cause of divorce. And so really, like, if you could release so much stress, have good conflict around money, because we do still have conflict around money, but we have so many years of talking about it well, and knowing that in all things, our unity is the first, that it doesn't cause us a lot of stress. And, we're gonna steer clear of divorce that's caused by money.
Yeah.
Like, these are good marriages here.
Yeah, I think it's where there's such a spiritual battle that you're walking into around money. 9 out of 10 marriages are actively avoiding talking about money. And when I say that, that means and this is the status quo without the Holy Spirit coming and rocking. And I speak a different future for you. If you stay on course, you have a 90% chance that you're going to be hiding a purchase from your spouse. You're going to be somehow hiding so that it's not a full walking in unity conversation. And the Holy Spirit wants better for you. And a lot of that has to do actually with dealing with your own heart issues about money. Like as we, like if you're if we're healthy individuals around how we interact with the Lord and how we interact about money, then it gives us a lot better shot of being able to together actually work on those issues. But it's worth kind of looking at how big of a deal it is. If you don't actively set out to do something differently, you're going to end up in the 90%. Which is why we're about to talk about budgeting. We're about to talk about tools. It's not rocket science, but it does take actual active intention.
Yeah.
Like you've got to intentionally pursue if you want to be in the 10%. By the Holy Spirit's power, you can be in the 10%. You talk about money. And in the other stat is that 94%, very, very huge majority of those who report having a healthy marriage talk about money regularly. Like we're talking multiple times per week.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's not going to happen unless you go for it. But by the Holy Spirit's power, you can, which is really, really powerful. The one thing that we've noticed in teaching this course, this is the 6th time, is often it's actually the folks that are your leaders who are on the edge of their seats and really, really interested on taking notes, because they understand how big of a deal it is, if that makes sense.
And that it's hard, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to stay hard, but like Wes said, like it takes some intention, and you're kind of like, I don't necessarily know how to move from here to here. So
So as you look forward, it's worth noting the people who are in marriage a little bit are going, whoa, this is a really big deal. I need tools to try to triumph in this area.
Yeah.
And so the way you can fast forward yourself a little bit into the moment where you can feel some of that tension and try to prepare for what marriage is going to feel like is actually, and I think you guys have done some of this, is actually looking at every purchase you made last month and sitting down and comparing the purchases that you made with each other. I would bet a significant amount of money that you're going to look over at the other person's list and go, why did you spend that on that?
There's gonna be some judgment.
You know?
Both ways, right? You're gonna be like, I'm sorry, you did what?
And as you've gone through the exercise to actually divulge your entire financial situation, it is worth reiterating. I think it's been said from the front before already. If you cannot divulge everything about your finances, every debt, every asset, every potential inheritance that might be coming, every potential person that you could see, like, could sue you, like anything that touches your finances. I'm trying to think of the most extreme thing that you might want to leave off to the side is not, maybe that's not actually on the balance sheet, or that's not actually coming. If there's anything that you're hiding about finances, you're not ready for marriage.
Yeah. The point
Which
is,
might
if,
sound cold, but yeah.
but if you can't share, don't get married, because like we've talked about, you become one, and so your finances become one. So what I do with my money is what he does with his money. So it doesn't mean that if there's debt, you shouldn't get married, right? That's not a sin. But it does mean that if you feel shame, or you don't want to talk about it, or you just want to leave it off the table, then the marriage needs to be delayed until you can kind of work through some of those issues, because it's not unity and it's not loving. It does become the other person's problem, 100%.
So in terms of how you actually, the first tool that we want to kind of camp out on for a minute is budgeting. As you're preparing for marriage, that looks like looking at last month's spending or the last 2 months' spending, and actually taking a look at, well, what did I spend? Because you may not have a good gauge of what you spent, and what did your future spouse spend last month, to actually get into some nitty gritty. Let's look at some credit card statements. If you're doing all cash, then write it all down. Somehow in one place, look at every dollar that you spent last month, and then writing a budget for, hey, we're living together, we put everything together, and we're married now. What does that budget look like? To try to take a look at what is it gonna look like to walk in unity together. And a lot of people coming into marriage in your life stage either haven't budgeted and haven't really felt the need to.
I would say haven't formally budgeted.
That's a great way to.
Because we actually all budget, and this is why we say no one's a mind reader. Because all of us come into our marriage with our baselines for what we think is appropriate. You know, whether your family took big, expensive vacations, you know, that could be a way that you're very different from your partner's family. And so when you're talking about taking a vacation, in your mind you're thinking, oh, we're gonna spend about 10 grand on this vacation, where they're thinking, we're going camping. And this isn't costing more than $1,500, right? So this is where we're saying no one's a mind reader in this, and that the same goes for what your expectations are for just how much you spend on different categories that touch your life.
Yeah, so what we're saying is that everybody does budget internally.
Yeah.
So you have a mental bandwidth for what you think it's appropriate to eat out every month. And
if it's one person, it's simple, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think we've all like internally budgeted. We're like, oh, I think I know about how much I have in the account, which means I can or cannot like do this thing or buy this thing or give this much money, because our giving actually impacts our marriage now too, right?
Yeah.
So we've all internally budgeted. So this is where no one's a mind reader. You're gonna have to put it down somewhere.
So if you don't budget, here's what it feels like to the miser. You're both hungry. It's late in the month. You've been feeling like, wait, we've been spending more than we're like something in your internal budgeting is like flagging a little bit. So you're like, oh, we probably need to be spending a little bit less, but you're both hungry, and your spouse says, hey, let's go out to eat real quick. And you say, no, we're like, this isn't the right time to eat out. We need to be saving money. Is that a good time when you're both hungry and you're running late for XYZ to figure out how much you should be spending on eating out? It's an awful time. You just set yourself.
You're having a fight.
Yeah. And so much. I mean, one of the things we like to talk about in marriage counseling is so many of the fights that we have are missing each other's expectations. Basically, when we miss each other's expectations around sex or money or showing up for something that you thought they were going to be on time, basically almost every fight, a really big chunk of them, are missing expectations. And if you both internally essentially write down your own expectations but don't tell each other, you're just walking into a minefield, essentially. Like, well, you're probably gonna miss each other's expectations.
Yeah, so we're gonna kind of move into a little bit like, how do we budget? So on that initial budget that Wes had made, I think potentially our whole fight was set off by a throw pillow. But guys, I really love throw pillows, and I like having lots of different ones. And you know, if you've had one for a couple of months, you might get tired of it, and so you just buy a new one or a cover, right? I mean, I haven't been of throw pillow covers, right? Because then you want to change them out. So I bring home a pillow, and he's like, "Why'd you buy that pillow?" Because I wanted to buy the pillow. Oh no. Thought it was a good idea. Liked the way it looked. And he's like, that was totally unnecessary. I don't think that was in our budget. And so you can see where this went. I was like, oh, this is our budget, huh? I felt totally unseen, right? And very powerless in our marriage. And because all of a sudden, this thing that brought me some joy, the home that I was building, and just the way that I was kind of expressing some creativity, I felt really judged. I felt really controlled, and I felt really powerless, even though I had a job and we actually did the same job. So there wasn't even the exasperating circumstance where he made more money than I did, which can also be a problem if you haven't kind of worked out how to walk this in unity.
Which we now experience. Our boys don't pay very much.
They don't. They pay in kisses, which is priceless, and not good for buying propos.
So I candidly actually don't remember what the core fight was about that fall, but I really distinctly remember what actually got us to really seeing each other was co-creating the budget, which functionally actually there may have been, I think there were a couple other tweaks, but the thing we really remember is that we created a category called home decor, which is like the pillow budget basically. And here's the magic of it, like if pillows were competing with, I forget what I was feeling had value, but when we're able to prayerfully sit before the Lord and look at each other, I was able to delightfully say, of course I want you to have what you're excited about. And set a budget for that. And then all my stress about whether we were ruining our financial future by buying too many things around the house went away, because we prayerfully sat before the Lord and there was a budget for that. And then we committed to live within these bounds. Within those bounds, there's complete freedom. And Christy's a true free spirit. And the crazy thing is that budgeting actually created the freedom to pursue. And there have been other things that have come up as well, but that's the best example.
I think we've talked about I think you guys have talked about boundaries in this class, and actually how within the boundary, you do feel a lot of freedom. You're like, I know how to operate in this space. And really, when you're creating the budget in unity, it does take a lot of vulnerability, because you have to kind of look at each other and say, this matters to me. But, like an example now is, we are educating our kids at home. So like the money that I spend on educating them shouldn't be competing against our groceries. And it doesn't actually matter how much money is there. You should know this is how much we're going to spend on groceries, and we should allocate this amount to spend on their education. And those two things shouldn't be in competition. So when you're creating your budget, that's just a helpful thing that we found, is what two things should compete against each other. Now, if I want to, do my hair a lot, maybe that should be in competition with going out to eat. That works for us. It might not work for you. Again, this is a very personal thing. It's your budget. You own it. You get to change it. You get to influence the categories and what's important to you. But the point is that you do it together, and you can vulnerably make space for the things that are important to you. And I feel like we kind of have gotten this question each time about giving. So I just want to address it a little bit. There is, do you mind if I start that now?
Just start.
So I'm just gonna, Larissa talked about money 2 weeks ago. It was fantastic. UPPERROOM has done some other teachings on giving and on the tithe, all really good. Robert Morris's book is really good. I think that's the one that Michael Miller referenced. So I just want to, though, take it back. The tithe is the 10%, right? It's your 10% before everything else comes out of your money. And we're not actually giving the tithe to God, we're returning it, because he said that it belongs to him. And so like Robert Morris says, he's like, don't rob God. God says that's mine.
I think God said that too.
Yeah, God said that too, actually. Robert Morris repeated it. So that's your tithe, right? Your tithe is your 10%. That comes out, and that really is kind of a non-negotiable as we're talking about how we do kingdom finances. There are other places that you want to give to, though, and so we typically call those offerings. And then there are other places where you find something and you just you feel the stirring to like I want to give you this, or like even if it's just a friend of yours, you can see that they're like not having a good day, and you want to bless them. whatever level that is, that kind of is coming out of a sacrifice. And so as you are looking at budgeting and we're talking about giving, one of the things we found really helpful is setting up a category for giving. And we change, we prayerfully, like we sit open-handed before the Lord, how much do you want us to allocate for kind of these offerings and some sacrificial giving? Because that is coming, money can only go one place. So it's coming out of our other places, but it allows us to agree on that amount. Mostly because if I sacrificially give all of our budget for eating out that month without talking about him, he didn't get the chance to joyfully give that. And we didn't walk in unity in that because I didn't bless him by taking away his option. And so this is why we find that the budget actually is really powerful, even in terms of spontaneous giving. If you give yourself, this is our budget, do we like to spontaneously give? Is this a thing that's important to one of us at least, or both of us? You just start setting money aside, and then you can joyfully give spontaneously as the need arises, without knowing that you have honored the Lord and using your resources wisely, but also knowing that you've honored your partner by not taking away their freedom to joyfully join you in giving. And I'm gonna bring this up because it's just so cool. Do you know the tithe is a place where God says we can test him? He says, and it's in Malachi. I wrote it down. Malachi 3:7. He says, he says, if you tithe, I will open the windows of heaven for you and pour out blessings so great that you won't be able to take it in. Try it, put me to the test. And I love that God said that. And so we're gonna stop there on tithing, but it is important, and God is really passionate about us not robbing him of what he said is his. And he can do significantly more with our 90% than we could do with the whole 100. It's kind of incredible, and it's played out every single month. Whether we had extra or whether we had what we thought was not enough, the Lord always has made it enough.
So every one of those categories in the budget and the entire thing is all unto actually talking to one another about it. Is unto regularly talking about and knowing where each dollar is going, knowing that it has a plan, and then creating the lowest stress environment to pre-decide together, if you will, so that you can have those conversations and get to joyfully make those decisions together. And kind of where this is going, kind of base level is to just kind of get these big chunks in place and to try to drop your stress level to okay, I know we can eat out. But here's where it's going is as you do that rhythm in and rhythm out, you're going to a place where you'll be able to start feeling like something doesn't feel quite right on this. I'm really feeling a heart's desire to be able to buy a house, and I don't feel like we're on track. And to be able to talk through a conversation where when money touches so many things about the goals that we set in our lives, and as you have those conversations, and if you have them regularly, it can create an opening where you can say, okay, this is feeling a little bit off, and you can pull that string and have a safe enough environment around money that it can help you pull a string where you actually see each other's hearts. Christy and I were talking on the way in as we were reviewing what we were gonna say. She made the comment that she actually really likes talking about money now, and I kind of cocked my head and I was like, or that we enjoy it now. I think this was the word you.
It's so good.
You said that we enjoy it, and I was like, do we enjoy it? And because it's kind of hard work to get in and be like, let's look at the budget
it's
together. And we just looked at the budget last night, and I was like, no, I would term it when it's really satisfying to get in unity together. And then we were talking about a conversation where in a high trust environment, talking about money just touched the edges of some deeper heart issues in a conversation. We're able to draw out the core, this is the future that I'm hoping for that's not quite happening, that really blossomed into future. And so in that context where if you can cultivate an environment where it's safe to say, I keep wishing that I could decorate a little bit more, and this money that we're having is just continuing to come up short. It's consistently, like, I have a dream of being able to do something really significantly more. When you have a safe environment around that, to be able to, then it's the spouse's job to draw that out. Like, what are you picturing? And you might even draw out some way more than you thought. Like, wow, I love painting. You love painting? I never knew you loved painting. Like, what future are you because it touches a deep, hard issue. So where it starts with, okay, we can go out to eat without having a fight. But then you can move to a place where you can have a safe place to talk about heart's desires. And in that context, then talking about money is actually pretty joyful and pretty attractive, because we're actually really interested in this person. Like,
And to that end, it does draw out, like, as we sit, because we do review our budget, our goal is weekly. Full transparency, it doesn't happen weekly.
Yeah.
So, we set the weekly goal, we get to it probably twice a month. So,
Good math.
but again, we stuck to it very regularly for a while. And we kind of, we've developed a lot of trust around this. And then kind of to that though, like Wes was saying, in those weekly budget check-ins, you actually can tell when someone's feeling a little bit off about something. And you're like, and again, this is a place where we're very vulnerable with each other about what we actually want to do with our money, because it does require a lot of vulnerability to be there. And so as you start to cultivate that, I can see, like, oh, his heart's having a hard time with this, especially, as you start to touch some of those bigger money decisions. But man, as you do this, the Lord has been our provider through our budget talks, through being really intentional about talking about our money. I think we both have really been able to access a deep place where we know that the Lord is our provision. We did take a career gap where we didn't make any money for a while, and those budget talks were not as hard as you think they would be, because we had set a budget and we'd chosen to live on it. But I think a lot of what those did, as we watched like our savings account click down as we just kept living and more money didn't keep coming in, it really allowed us to sit every week and talk about God is our provider and He's given us everything that we need. Because we had to look at each other every month and be like, so do we still keep going? Do we still, does our budget feel good? You want to keep spending like this? And it really had both of us sitting there and saying, like, well, you're gonna have to face the fact that the Lord is our provider, not you, and not me. And we're gonna sit here and be faithful to Him in what He's called us to do in this, without a lot of fear. Which brings up point number 3, actually, because you get there through this process of mutual submission to one another. And so you get there because it's a system that you create together, right? And you get there by making mistakes in your budgeting and showing each other a lot of grace. And being like, oh man, I tried to keep that grocery budget, but our kids ate a lot more and I didn't. Or I actually just really messed up. I just wanted that thing and I did it, and it wasn't in the budget. And you get there by showing each other a lot of grace and not passing judgment on the person. You say, okay, well, how can we make this better for you? How can we change this for you? Or just forgive them. I'm sorry, I forgive you, it's okay. It's money, we'll keep going.
The trick with budgeting is it always has to come from somewhere else.
It does. And
either from a future month where you kind of pay back the previous month, or from another category. Mm-hmm. If you just, it'd be a careless use of the word to just say forgive it and act as if it didn't happen. Then you've actually kind of broken the core thing, if that makes sense. Because if you start, if there's a better word than forgive, if you just ignore it, then you don't really have a budget anymore, if that makes sense. Yeah. Just one clarification.
It is. So I think he's right. The money does have to come from somewhere. You do have to figure that out. But the process of what it looks like to be in relationship is to say, well, let's figure out where that money comes from. Yeah. Right? Not how could you? But well, let's figure this out together.
The crazy thing about $1 is it can only go one place. It's kind of this unit of power that only goes one place. And it walks us into a lot of great conversations around unity. And for the husbands in the room, I really want to challenge you that in everything about money, including the big decisions like, do I quit my job and become an entrepreneur? Do we leave one career and go to another? Do we buy a house? In every single financial decision, and this, and future wives own it if this is for you as well. But don't walk forward until you have unity, even in giving. If one of you is passionate about the tithe, God's more passionate about unity than he is about the tithe. He's excited to walk that road with you because it's absolutely brilliant journey of learning the tithe and learning offerings and then learning to go above and beyond. That's a brilliantly fun journey. But even in the tithe, if you're not in unity, this is absolutely imperative. You can't bowl over. We're talking about mutual submission in this like supernatural, crazy way where husbands were called to lay down our lives for it. Like the example that we're given is husbands be like Jesus. And what he did is he laid his entire life down for their spouse.
And wives are called to submit to their husbands as they would to the Lord. It's supernatural. It's not a human thing that we want to do or that we actually can do. But it is supernatural. And we're empowered to do that because we're new creation.
Yeah. And the Lord's faithful. If he wants you to go to China to be missionaries, he's going to bring your spouse along to that vision. You don't just power along and say, we're doing this, honey. You know? You know?
And that's where it's been true every time, is when you wait. If there is a desire that is burning on your heart, just know it's not going to end up looking like you want to end up if you push on without your partner beside you. And if they don't feel that, then you just ask the Lord. Because if it is a dream that he's given you, he's also giving you the partner. And that partner he gave you doesn't hold you back. He didn't give them to you as dead weight or to hold you back from the thing that you were called to do. He gave them to you to make you who you are and to build you up and to create a family and to express his glory. So
I want to share two fruit about being willing to wait. Because effectively this means patience when you want to do something and your spouse isn't ready to do it. If that makes sense. Or
we've been there, both of us have.
One is there's an incredible fruit, future husbands, that you can, there's just a safety when your spouse actually sees like, oh, he is honored, like he's not going to scare me, basically. He's not going here without me. Like you can create a ridiculous amount of safety for your soon-to-be spouse. And the other is that I've found myself actually getting changed by Christy.
Yeah.
So when we look back at that summer that we first got married, somehow I grew up with a paradigm that spending less was holier than spending more. I thought this was a right and wrong issue in my mind. I thought it was the right thing to do is spend as little as possible so that we could have a future that was safe or something like that. It felt right and wrong to me. I look back at that summer and there's this pang of regret because I've been so affected by spending time with Christy that I actually can see the good in spending money on going out to a hotel and having a fun summer. And I look back with some pang of regret of like, wow, we had a summer in Newport, Rhode Island, plenty of money to spend, and instead of kind of really enjoying that summer, we really, really held back on our finances and got caught by the police and just like, it could have been so much more, you know? But being able to actually see that was years later. Like it took years of being present and listening to one another and starting to take value in experiencing a moment. I've been changed by Christy in a beautiful way. It is redemptively beautiful to look at that summer and realize what was possible if I wasn't such a miser. Like, so two things. One, you can create an incredible safety for your spouse, and then you can be changed by them. I'm more beautiful for having been changed by Christy because I was willing to be affected by her point of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and similarly, when you recognize, because I'm so glad to be home with my kids, but it does let me feel really vulnerable, right? Because I'm not making my own money anymore, and but starting that process when we did, really starting that budgeting process, and what it actually also forces you to do is look at how much money you're making and then ask the Lord, where do you want this money to go? I didn't realize how much money I was spending on coffee. Did you want that money to go somewhere other than coffee? So starting that process there builds a track record of trust with the Lord that, let me see Wes, see his heart and see his passion and say, the Lord is our provider. You can do what you want. Like, we're gonna be okay. And look at him through, a season of, it could have felt really stressful and a lot of financial instability, and it didn't. It actually felt expectant because I knew that the Lord was going to provide for us, and we were just waiting to see how. But getting released from that fear of needing to provide for myself and then allowing myself to be vulnerable before Wes, because I knew that the Lord was going to be my provider, gave him freedom to step into the calling that the Lord had for him. And we're sharing that mostly because we know that our testimony of what Jesus has done in our life is a spirit of prophecy over you. So we just want to release that over you guys also, that the Lord's your provider. And you have a lot of freedom and unity in your finances and in your family. And that releases each of you to be free to pursue the calling that he has for your family, not as individuals. So that's kind of our wait until you're unified. It's worth it. You're gonna go somewhere really good because the Lord wants your unity more than he cares about your calling or what you do with your money.
I think it's worth pausing I just really want to honor what Christy, just the story that she shared there was, when she stopped working with the Navy, she had to work through this process where I was working and she wasn't, to really see the Lord as her provider. And it was actually several years later when I became an entrepreneur that it really hit me in the face that there was no check coming every couple weeks, and I had to start to learn to look to the Lord for my provider. And she was like, "No, I've already worked through this. I already know you haven't been my provider for like 5 years, Wes." But it's worth just honoring that process that she'd gone through is really significant, and you can imagine a radically huge asset as a couple and as an entrepreneur to be able to take crazy risk. Because 5 years later, she had walked through this process of really seeing the Lord as her provider. I caught up a number of years later, but just honoring what she did, and it highlights there's some really significant things that we can go through. We got to go through with the Lord and just get straight. Like, who's the provider? Is it me or God? I'm slowly clawing my way into the idea He truly is the provider. It's not me. And the more I can get that, it's just huge strength comes to the whole when I can get that idea straight. And that's true of kind of every biblical truth as we discover generosity or just kind of submit things to the Lord. There's a lot of just getting it straight here that just overflows to the spouse.
Yeah, because you're one.
Yeah. That's pretty much what we have to share.
That is what we have to share.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if we got boring.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
You can tell we care. We care a lot, and this is important to us. But I think we're gonna stay here for questions. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, and if we don't do a great job answering it, your leaders are more than welcome to chime in with a different perspective than one we have, because there's more than one way to do this well.
I can jump in and answer one of the ones that comes up every single time.
Go ahead.
Often, because you all are thinking about merging your finances, the question is, should you have separate accounts or joint accounts? Has anybody thought about that question? And I know other people that we deeply love and respect say different things. We're passionately believers in the joint account. The two shall become one, and the financial system has actually reflected God's principles in this principle of joint ownership. And as you bring your finances into one, to some degree, you can make a case it's almost irrelevant whether it's in two accounts if you live in a single decision-making framework, if that makes sense. But why not let the joint account reflect what God did in heaven? And what you do affects each other. There's kind of the only reasons not to do it, in my mind, are fear or kind of wanting to control things, kind of all things that I'm not aspiring to, essentially. And the reasons to do it are to reflect beauty and
extend trust.
And there's some effective, if having walked with a bunch of families, you end up in these moments where somebody's in the hospital and they're not conscious. And if you're in a joint account, you have access to all the capital. there's no, oh no, I can't get to that money because it's not my, I'm not on the title. Or if somebody passes away, there's some very kind of just practical benefits to you in financial planning. One of the things is estate planning. If things are titled jointly, as soon as you have a death certificate, it instantly is owned by the other person. It's very, very effective estate planning. So there's kind of all the reasons to do it seem like, in my mind, seem to reflect heavenly principles. All the reasons not to are fear and what if this doesn't work and we're going to get a divorce and all these not very exciting reasons.
I would also just, you hear us too, we're big advocates for a co-created budget, or a budget that is both. So really, all of that kind of hashing out and trust and all of those things in our minds actually happens through the budget, not through account fighting. Also, just don't make it hard on yourselves, right? This is, as you're already merging so many things, why keep up with more things? So honestly, I'm kind of life is too complicated in other areas to make your checking accounts complicated. Just have one. So,
and if that's a really big issue in your heart, one of the cool things, Larissa shared some really cool things a couple weeks ago around money. And one of the things that she shared was she had plenty of money in the account, but she was still she could tell her heart was having these really weird reactions to what was going on. So if your heart is having a really weird reaction to the idea of having a joint account, what she did is exactly what I challenge you to do. Sit before the Lord and say, Dad, why is my heart going all crazy when I think about a joint account? Will you help me to understand what's going on? Or anything around money. If you're, sometimes we can just self-identify. I'm having a weird response. You did a small thing. And my emotional reaction was much larger than appears to be appropriate for the moment. Once we get over our anger, we can see it, and get to go, Lord, what's going on in my heart? Why is my heart rate going up when we talk about a joint account? And just try to unpack that with the Holy Spirit.
He wants to bring healing there. But
best resources for estate planning, books, people you
estate planning, to
articles.
actually
Just to learn about, to set it up, to get an idea of combining,
we
how to title things, bringing stuff from past, before, assets.
So for most people, you can get the entire job done pretty simply by titling everything joint, and then setting, if you have an IRA, you just set the beneficiary, and then do a legal Zoom for a very simple will. Until you get into complex houses and all kinds of things like that, if you just title everything jointly and then set a beneficiary on retirement accounts and have a very simple will, you got the job done, basically. So,
but let's say, if there's I'm sure with financial planning, you know somebody, or you did some estate planning when it comes to that for more complex issues. Is there a book that stands out to you
on estate planning? I don't usually get questions about it. People wanting to read about estate planning. Let me think about it and come back to you.
As far as
in terms of how to, so Ron Blue wrote a really good book about how to pass money on to kids. Because a lot of the hard issues when you get into estate planning is how does this affect the next generation? That actually, and what he says there, and it's powerful, is to really dig into the goals of what you're trying to get done. And he walks it through kind of this multi-step process of how are you going to affect the kids. So Ron Blues, I can look up the title of that. That's the most effective in terms of figuring out what you want to get done. And then really it's lawyers who just figure out the mechanisms of it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, yes.
Do you have any wisdom for like navigating that balance between we're planning for our future, we're planning our finances for like 10, 15, 20 years down the line versus the like, you know, because I feel like even in like scripture, there's this balance between like, you don't know what you're gonna do tomorrow. Like you have no idea. And like that surrendered, like financially surrendered to the Lord, mixed with the like, you know, in 40 years, I want my kids to be reaping this. But do you have any wisdom for budgeting around that or co-creating budgets around that?
Yeah, I'll say there are different seasons, and there are seasons that you're going to be called to live in faith for things. And one of the things that I love about budgeting is that it kind of forces us to be asking the Lord, what's the season? And so we typically will do like a really big budgeting check-in annually. That usually looks like the beginning of the year for us, just because we are setting we set time aside for it. But I think we've done it other times of the year, and then some years when things were a little bit less kind of like moving on steady, we would kind of do those big budgeting check-ins more frequently, like quarterly. So, and that when you're talking about like what season are we living in financially, that really looks like I actually would just kind of print out a spreadsheet that was kind of representative, or just write down like just the different budget categories that we had. Like sometimes I would just do it in a notebook, and I kind of would just lay my hands on them and be like, what do you think about this one, God? Where are you at on this one right now? Like, should we be putting money towards this right now or not? And then, you know, just kind of like feeling like the Lord's word, and sometimes he's super specific on, yeah, you guys don't need to be putting money in that right now. And sometimes though, like, you know, your season is just gonna change. So that's actually one of the reasons why we are such big budget advocates, is because it really allows you to do more frequent check-ins with the Lord also, and saying, what do you care about right now? Because I think there will be times that you're like, no, we actually do want to save, and that will be kind of unto something that the Lord has for you. And sometimes you won't, and that's actually also okay. So
it's also possible to exactly what Christy said. You can really just start small if you feel a passion to do something, and if you feel like, I really feel like it's honoring to set a goal and do something. It can be very meaningful to put $10 a month into something because you started, and you're like, well, by faith I hope to be able to grow that. And what Christy's describing is the ability to sit before the Lord and say, Lord, what do you want to do? And it's actually a lot of it. Jesus asked so many times, like, what do you want? He was trying to draw out of your heart's desires. And that it's really powerful to actually just write down your heart's desires. Like, if you desire to buy a house and that actually burns in you, write it down and hold it before the Lord. Even if you don't have the ability to do much to get there today, maybe today it's more just, I need to pay down debt and get debt free. That's what we're actually working towards. If you write it down and start praying towards it, and then it can be really powerful to put $10 a month towards it, because you're like, in faith, Lord, I hope for this. Goal setting can be a powerfully prayerful faith statement, if that makes sense, which is kind of juxtaposed against the world would want us to just kind of have a bunch of fear that we would not have money when we're sick and we're old or something like that. But the Lord would rather draw out of you your heart's desires, have you write them down, hold them before the Lord and say, Lord, what do you want to do? And he might say, I see that you have a desire to live in Colorado someday, or whatever it was. And then you just hold it before him and you pray. He's not really held back by budgets. I mean, one of our testimonies is through some leader seasons, we've consistently sat before the Lord and just kind of written down our dream list of, like, if we had all the money in the world, what do we want to do? And we'd write down, like, oh, we really would love to be able to have a vacation in Colorado.
This
Or
had
we-
no bearing on our budget.
Yeah.
This was irrelevant. The budget was irrelevant
Yeah.
in our dream list.
And we would write down their dream list, and a good chunk of it would have, we'd be like, there's no budget for it. Like, cool, let's write it down. And then I think it was 3 years running into that, we would read.
3 years in a row. Yeah.
Of looking at it and going, very little of this was paid for by us, but he kept doing the things we would write down.
But it would all happen. And we were like, it didn't happen necessarily how we thought it was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But we were like, oh, but we did that. Or that happened, or actually there, sometimes it was money, sometimes there was extra, and we're like, oh, we got to do that. But really, we felt comfortable when extra money did come. That was a surprise to us because we had sat with the Lord and prayed about it, and we were on the same page. Because then that's also just a place where money gets to draw your hearts together. Because you're like, well, this is what I wrote down. What did you write down? And then when things actually happen, you're kind of ready to move on them. So.